Welcome to the Chicago Money Show. We help you get informed, feeling engaged, and have fun with your finances. I'm your host, Bridget Sullivan Mermel, and I own a family financial planning practice in Chicago. We focus on money, meaning, and happiness. Picking a career, finding a job, and negotiating for salary and perks. That's our subject today. Our guest is Teutsch. He's got a family financial planning firm in Washington, D.C. It's called Values Added Financial. His background after leaving the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, he worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and before that he ran national financial skills and investment education programs for the AFL-CIO. He helps his clients find the balance between happiness and money, and he'll help us figure it out too. Welcome, Zach. Okay, so the news is that there's 2 jobs for every person that's looking for a job. So it's obviously a great time to try to find a job. What do you do? Does that mean you have to look? When should you look? How do you know you should look?
Well, I think a strong job market generally means that people can find somewhat better options, and also that they have somewhat more bargaining power at their current job. But of course, people should only take paid work if it fits into their life goals and life plan. For most people, most of the time they need the money. So you want to find work that you find meaningful, that you feel good about, and that can help you pay the bills. But for some people, you might call it the lucky few, or people for whom they've got luck and skill and discipline, or whatever it is, they've been able to achieve financial independence. And then it's a little bit of a more complicated question, because often people find tremendous meaning and connection in their work, and it's sometimes hard for people to find that outside of work, which is why sometimes when people retire, they have a hard time. So, I think the main reason most people work most of the time is for financial interests, and I think we'll probably talk a fair amount about that, but it's not the only reason people work.
So let's talk about, it seems like people have complicated feelings about their jobs. Do you think it's a myth that people even like their jobs? What should we be aiming for? Is that like a certain amount of kind of grind just baked in, or should we be like loving our job like it seems like some people seem to be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Many years ago, nobody would have ever asked this question. Do you enjoy your job? When people were mostly coal mining or working on the farm, or working in factories 17 hours a day or 12 hours a day, there was no assumption that people enjoyed their job. The assumption was that they did the work to survive. And at some point in the development of our economy, people started to expect self-actualization from their work, which was a tremendous step forward. But then I think a lot of people are disappointed when they don't find it. And it's certainly true that some people find tremendous satisfaction from their work, and others don't. I had a family member who used to say, of course work's unpleasant, that's why they pay you. He also said, that's why they call it work. So I think people will find a wide variety of things. One of the things that I've found with clients and friends who in my world tend to be progressives is people think a lot about the top goal of the organization as they imagine what work they want to do, and they really want to be in a place that's mission aligned. And I think there's tremendous merit to that view. But I think people often underestimate how much of their professional satisfaction comes from having a boss they enjoy, or a workplace which is empowering to them, or colleagues who are kind and supportive, or whatever the things are about their colleagues and workplace that matter to them. Bridget, I'm curious what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, well, I would, in my own experience, is the same thing. I look at it as kind of trying to get closer to where to happiness. Not trying, every day is not a happy day at work or at home or whatever. I was reading a book recently by. It's called Don't Trust Your Gut. It's by Stas Stevens Davidovitz. And he was saying that most people don't like work, but there are 4 things that can help you be happier at work. One is lower commute, let's say 3.5, lower commute or work from home, listen to music, and work with friends, like people who you consider friends, which mirrors some of what you're saying too. Like, I think what I've seen with people, some people, the relationship with their boss is crucial for their work happiness and their life happiness. Whereas some people, they don't worry about it as much. It's not as crucial. And so I think that those are factors, again, when we're talking about trying to find a job, et cetera. The other thing I think there's an ideal of like flow. There's a researcher who, Susan Mattel, I can never pronounce his last name. He's a University of Chicago guy, actually. But he came up with, he researched the idea of flow, and he found that a lot of people have it at work. And that's just those feelings when you're just totally engaged with what you're doing. And again, it's mixed with, I got to fill out my payroll forms, and or I have to do these mundane. I got to fix my hard drive's not working, or my, the mundane things of it or just the obstacles you have to get through. So here's my next question: is like, so what if you want to just change your career? I know that you've done that, and I've done it myself too. What are your best tips for career changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that any career changer has to wonder about is, what is transferable? What have they already learned in their life, which is a useful skill? And I think people sometimes undersell some of the things that they've learned. One of the most important things is how to operate in a professional context. And a lot of people don't have it right when they enter their workforce, whether that's after high school or after college or after graduate school. And it takes time. Most of the people that we've hired at Values Added, in fact, all of them, I think, are career changers, and people in that setting bring a wealth of life experience. So don't lose track of what's valuable about what you've done, but also it's always going to be easier to make the shift if you make the shift into an industry which builds on some of your past experiences. Bridget, I think you had something you wanted to say about that, didn't you?
Yeah, that's the same thing. Bird Whitehead is one of my mentors and inspiration. And he wrote a book where he talked about how people get rich because he had a long career in the financial industry. And he said that people building on their career is the way to go, like just taking the next step and not ditching the entire industry. But that's not to say that, I mean, the focus of the book was how to get rich, not how to optimize your happiness. And they can be the same, but they're different things. So it's not like you just have to keep track of what you really are, what your goals really are, I think, when you're thinking about career switching. And honestly, I do want to say, I think people think that getting into our careers, financial planning, if you're interested in money, it is really a great industry for older people, because sometimes people, I think there's ageism in careers is real, but there's reverse ageism too. And our industry has reverse ageism, so it's actually more favorable for older people.
I think that's right, Bridget, because would you really, most people don't want to trust their life savings to a 24-year-old. If a person has built their whole life and they're approaching retirement, they don't necessarily think that a young person will be able to help them. Now, some will and some won't, and I don't want to endorse that view, but I find it to be fairly common. For me, the things that I think a person needs to be an excellent financial planner are, they need to have good analytic skills, enough to understand tax planning and investments. They need to understand math a bit, although it's not fundamentally a math profession. You need to be fluent and capable. But what I think people really need is organization and people skills, because clients really need to know that their advisor cares about them, because that helps them build comfort and it builds a connection. And so not only do financial advisors need to be able to offer really excellent advice, they have to be able to think of the advice, but they also have to be able to engage with the client to understand what's appropriate to their situation and what they'll be able to internalize and how to communicate it in a way that's potentially transformative. So there are not all that many professions which require project management and organization, also require uh, interpersonal empathy skills, and also require analytic skills. But if somebody happens to have that range of skills, they likely could be a very good financial planner. Um, Earlier, what you were saying about the different threads that come together reminded me of a Japanese concept that I learned from one of my mentors, Professor Danny Warshay, who's over at Brown University, where I studied. And the idea is Ikigai, Ikigai. Anybody can Google it and find it. And the most famous presentation of the idea is 4 circles that overlap. So imagine a Venn diagram, but 4 circles instead of 2. And it talks about the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And any 2 of those can overlap to produce an interesting idea, but you really want, ideally, your work to be in the center. You want it to be something that you're good at, because it is very unpleasant to have a job that you never quite measure up. You want it to be something that you're paid for, because that's, for a lot of people, the key aspect of a job is that it can help support, material comfort in their life, or at least getting by. You want it to be something that you love, because just being good at something and being paid for it isn't enough, because eventually self-loathing enters if it's not something you genuinely care about. And you want it to be something that the world needs. It's extremely frustrating to make money doing something that doesn't matter. So you really want to believe that what you're doing creates a sense of giving back, or a sense of service. And every human has a deep need to want to be of service. And for some people, they fulfill that need by being a kind and caring friend or family member. And some people do that, and they also have that experience in their work life. And so what I always say to clients is, it's really important to your satisfaction and well-being that you're of service. It's good for the world, and it's also important to you. And I especially think about this with people as they're approaching the idea of retirement. Is, for a lot of people, their social connection, their sense of service was linked with their work. And this is especially true of men in the generation that's retiring now.
Yeah.
So people really have to think about how to fill out those needs with something that's not work.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and we'll talk more about retirement in a few minutes. I just want to remind people, our viewers, that we're taking calls. So if this conversation piques a question for you, just call us at the number on the screen, and we'd be happy to talk with you. We're going to move on to talking about negotiating. So you work with a lot of people negotiating their salary when they're starting a job, or presumably maybe switching a job, switching within a firm, etc. A lot of people feel intimidated by negotiating. To walk me through the steps to helping people figure it out.
Bridget, thanks for asking. I think that so many people, young and old, men and women in every gender identity, people of all sorts, have trouble with this. And one of the lessons that I've learned that I thought was extremely useful, I heard best expressed by Ramit Sethi, the author of I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which is actually a tremendous book about financial literacy and financial decision making, but also career and life design. Mm-hmm. It's a really great book. I don't love the title, but I love the content. Ramit just did tremendous work there. And one of the things he says, which I think is exactly right, is the job negotiation the salary negotiation starts when on the form or the job application, it asks you for your salary requirement or your salary history. And you have to realize that that's the beginning of the negotiation. And Ramit has some scripts for how you deal with that. Um, and I think they're very wise. And I would just say, when somebody asks for salary requirements, it's a trap. Because if you guess too low, if they would have been willing to pay you $70,000 and you say your salary requirement is $50,000, then you're at a tremendous disadvantage if they make you an offer later. Because it's very hard to make up the difference between what you said you wanted and what you could have gotten. So if you guess low, it hurts your salary negotiation. And if you guess too high, if you say my salary requirement is $90,000, but they were planning on 70, you may even knock yourself out of consideration.
Cool.
So the only way to not hurt your position there is to guess exactly right. So it's a loser's game. So just don't guess.
So should you always ask for more than you want and then negotiate down?
It's a great question. I think that the best thing to do is to avoid being the first one to say a number at all.
Okay.
So I would sidestep any request for you to say salary requirements at the beginning. And I would use a script like Ramit's that just says, hey, I'm really excited about this position. Let's figure out if we're the right fit, and I'm sure we can work out the money. Mm-hmm. And if they insist, I'd say, they often, a recruiter will say something like, well, I don't want to waste your time or their time, so can you just give me a number? And then I would say, oh, I totally understand your interest in not waste anybody's time. Can you just tell me then the budgeted amount, and I'll tell you whether that could work.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
So you're saying they'll always have something in mind. They have a budget.
That's right.
Okay.
So you don't want to be the first one to name a number. You would really like them to be the first ones to name a number. And then that usually introduces some back and forth. But I think a lot of people don't do the requisite research to understand what their value is. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes people will just say, I want more because of this specific issue in my life or something like that. And I find when I've been negotiating and when I advise clients on this, it works much better for them to have called around. So for instance, I was advising somebody who was taking a job in a community health clinic, and they were trying to figure out what would happen in the salary negotiation. And so I said, oh, you have some other friends who do similar jobs, ask them what they make. And so they did the research, and then the clinic said, okay, we'd love you to come on board. How's $50,000? And this person was able to say, when I was doing the research, I found that a much more typical salary for this role is $62,000. And I think I have better than average experience. So I would think I'd be over the average, not under the average. What do you think about that? And that puts people into a much more substantive discussion, I think, than if that person had just said, I'd really like 64, because the question isn't really about feelings. It's about what the alternatives are to a successful negotiation.
Yeah, you've said a couple things that I think are really interesting in that. One is how you did the negotiation or the research, which was ask some friends. So you can underplay asking some friends and not even call that research. You could just be saying, I just called a couple people. But it is actually doing research. You're actually talking to people that are on the ground doing this. And then I really like how you said, here's my number. Here's what I'm proposing, whatever the number is. How do you think about that? Because I think it can be natural for us to go on the defensive in negotiation. And that, just putting it that way, can probably help the person. It shows that you're empathetic with the person on the other end. And you're trying not to put them on defensive either, because I have done a lot of salary negotiations when I'm the boss. And while it is easier than when you're the employee, it's not really that much easier.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right, Bridget. I think it's helpful. A lot of people focus in on the tactics of what number exactly will I choose to counter offer with. But I think it's much more useful for people to think about what should they do before the negotiation and how should they have those conversations. There's a wonderful, famous book. I even have a few copies on my shelf here, called Getting to Yes.
Uh-huh.
And it's about collaborative negotiation. Um, and I think that's a wonderful book for anybody to read who wants to learn more about negotiation. It came out of, it's by Uri, and it's who's a Harvard author, and built the negotiation practice at Harvard, if I remember correctly. But that, I mean, I think that's the all-time best book. For me, one of the things I like to do is, a lot of people have the image that when they're negotiating, they're sitting across the table from the other person. And I want to think about how quickly and effectively can I switch so that we're sitting on the same side of the table and we're collaboratively solving a problem instead of competitively negotiating. So in my example, where somebody says, I think my skills are above average, and I think the average is about $62,000, the other person can then say, you know, I agree, you're clearly above average. The problem is I have $55,000 budgeted. And a really important thing has happened. Everybody's agreed that the person is valuable and that there's a constraint. And so now you may have managed to jump over the table so that you're collaboratively solving the problem of, I'm worth more than this, but here's the constraint. What do we do?
Right. Another thing I like that when you were talking about it is that you said, don't talk about your personal problems when you're trying to negotiate. I was in one negotiation at one point where the person, I was talking about the person's raise, I was their manager, and they started telling me about all their expenses that they had and how they couldn't live on this amount of money. And that was the wrong approach. You know, that, like, it's not that I didn't have empathy for that, but it's from the boss's point of view, it's like, tell me about how all the valuable things you've done for the company and how you've helped the company's mission, not about your rent. I mean, not that that's not important to you. It probably is important to you. It probably is why you want more money. But that's not what you have to, again, it's a real interesting test in your empathy and understanding somebody else's point of view if you look at it that way.
I think that's right. Now, people can potentially guilt their boss into paying them more through saying, you know, I've recently had this medical problem or this family problem. And bosses ideally are very empathetic and kind people and might be responsive. But ultimately, that negotiation isn't about aligning both sides' interests.
Interesting.
And you really want a negotiation to be about everybody getting what they want out of it.
Okay, so I had a viewer ask a question about negotiating. Here's the question. I work for a government agency and have interviewed and been offered new positions. It's great. When it comes to negotiating, the people hiring typically say they don't have flexibility. The budget is their budget. I suspect there may be some perks that are flexible. How do I even find out what those flexible perks might be? What do you suggest in these structured situations?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Now, I used to work in government myself, in the federal government. And before that, I worked in a union setting, and because I was a union staff member, I was actually in a union myself. So I know that in government and most unionized settings, there are much more constrained opportunities for negotiation, which frankly is a good thing, because it means that just about everybody in the same role with the same experience makes the same amount of money. So it means if you're Black, you're not going to earn less than a white person for the same work most of the time in those situations. And likewise with women and men. So there's a lot of benefit. It means that when you get a promotion, you automatically get the new fair wage for that. It means that every year you probably get a raise, and you probably also get a cost of living adjustment, and you don't have to beg for it. It just happens. And it lets the supervisor and the employee worry more about their work together than negotiating about money. I didn't have to do a salary negotiation until much later in my career, because I came up through union environment. So there are some benefits to it, but there's also some constraints. Like the person who was asking said, it's much harder to negotiate. So when you're negotiating, one thing that can sometimes happen is you can sometimes get them to hire you for a different role or revise the role to a different pay grade or a different number of steps. So you wouldn't, but you can't usually say, great, thanks for offering me to be a clerk, offering me the job as a clerk 7. I'd like to be a clerk 7, but make twice as much. They
Right.
can't offer you that, but they might be able to hire you as a clerk 9 instead of a clerk 7 because a clerk 9 makes more.
Interesting.
So that's one thing, is be very attentive to the question of could you get a slightly different job title or a greater number of steps. Sometimes they can give you credit for past experiences when they set your level of seniority within your positions. That's another thing to look at. You want to talk to somebody in the organization if you can to understand what you might be able to negotiate for. And if you find a friendly HR person, you might be able to do a version of the jump over the table issue that I was talking about before, which is instead of being adversarial, maybe you can be cooperative.
Interesting. So you might be able to get the HR person to kind of talk off the record a little bit and see what might be possible, but not necessarily the HR person that's dealing with your situation.
It may be the HR person. Often in a union and government work environment, usually in Illinois, I think most government workers are union. Usually there's an HR person who's involved in the hiring who's different from the supervisor. And there might even be a hiring official who's yet a third different person. Mm-hmm. So, you can say to somebody, I'm really excited about this. I understand the salary isn't very flexible, but what are the other things which are subject to negotiation? What have people sometimes been able to agree with in similar situations?
Okay, great. So Zach, I want to thank you so much for talking with us today. If people want to find out more about what you do, where should they go to do that?
Oh, sure. They can go to our website, which is valuesadded.com. They can email me. I'm Zach at valuesadded.com, and I read all my every email that comes to my box I look at. So feel free to do that. And they can also follow me on Twitter, as long as Twitter's still a thing, which
so far
seems like it might not be for all that much longer. But over there, I'm at ZTEUTSCH.
And my name is Bridget Sullivan Mermel. I own a fee-only financial planning firm. You can check out our show's website at chicagomoneyshow.com and sign up for a newsletter so that you get a heads up before shows. If you've got questions for us for future shows, email ask@chicagomoneyshow.com. Thanks for watching.